Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of our photography review show. I hope you all had a great week, and I hope you're ready for more photography reviews. Anyway, it's been a while, it's been a few weeks since we done this last, so I'm really excited to be back and review your photos here on our YouTube channel or on our Facebook group and page. Anyway, starting from the beginning, my name is Jakub. I'm a landscape photographer based in West Sussex, England, and I'm also photography educator and owner of Clever Photographer, the home of digital tools for photographers, and also the home of everything you can imagine for Luminar and Luminar Neo. Anyway, guys, what we do in this show, basically, I look at your photos, I give you feedback on what I think that you could do differently or improve. And hopefully, by doing that, that will help you to ongoingly improve your photo editing skills and photography skills. Now, when we look at the reviews, we usually look at three parts of your photos. We look at the technical part. This is where we look at things like exposure, sharpness, noise, details, and so on. After that, we look at the artistic part. This is where we look at composition, storytelling, the overall feel of the image, and everything to do with that. And finally, in the third part, if we have extra time and if I think that it's beneficial, we also look at the photo editing. I try to give you some tips and tricks on what you could improve there and how you could maybe edit your image differently. So now you know what we do. To join us, if you want to send your pictures over, it's super easy. All you need to do is to join our membership, Clever Photographer Plus, and you can do that by heading to our website, cleverphotographer.com/forward membership. What will you get with our membership? You will get access to this photography review show. You will get access to our Clever Photographer Academy Facebook group. And more importantly, you will get a monthly bundle full of digital tools, including Lightroom and Luminar Neo presets, overlays, textures, backgrounds, custom brushes, and so much more. Each of the month is always themed in a certain photography style. So, for example, in this month it was food photography, and next month it's gonna be landscape photography. So usually it has around 250 300 elements. Definitely something to worth check out. And if you want to do that, then head to our website cleverphotographer.com/forward membership. So this is for what we're gonna do and how to join us. Now, before we jump into the reviews, I have few updates and news I quickly want to share. First one, I'm sure that you all noticed Luminar released, or Skylum released Luminar for iPad photo editing application. Definitely worth checking out if you have this device. If you own iPad, then head to the app Store, download the application, and you can actually get 7 days free trial where you can test the application and see what you think. If you need some help, we have a tutorial kind of covering the full application on our YouTube channel, and we also starting to add more videos. We did a video about 5 hidden features in the application. We have a video where I'm going to show you 5 or 6 different ways on how to edit black and white pictures in the application. And as the time goes and the application improves, I will be releasing more tutorials covering the application. So that's the Luminar for iPad. It's been released last week. And if you want to test it and check it, then head to your App Store on your iPad. We also released a complete guide for Luminar for iPad, which is an ebook. It has almost 70 pages covering every single tools, workflows, overviews, shortcuts, everything you can imagine. And on the top of it, you will also get a video tutorials helping you to use every single tool in that application. So this is for the Luminar for iPad. And now for this upcoming weekend, starting from Saturday, then for 4 days, I will be going to Birmingham here in UK for a massive photography and video show. It's in a big centrum in Birmingham. Usually it's massive things. Thousands of people come over there, and I will be there with Skylum team on their stand. And what I'm going to be doing live editing twice a day. And also, I will be there to talk to you about photography, photo editing, about Luminar for iPad, and everything to do with photography. So if you want to see me, if you want to meet me, if you want to meet face in face, then come and see us in Birmingham for the photography show. I would love to meet you in person, and it would be great to be able to chat more about photography. So that's for that. And finally, just as kind of early bird information, later this week, we're going to be opening access to our upcoming landscape photography conference. So later, most the last weekend in May, we're going to be doing 2 days live conference online where for 2 days I will be teaching 6 landscape photography sessions where I'm going to be covering everything from raw development editing, how to edit dramatic landscape, how to edit blue hour, nightscape, how to edit long exposure. I will give you some tips and tricks on how to edit drone photography, panorama photography. Also, I have a great class about how to uh, basically fix a photo or how to help a picture which maybe isn't that great, how you can kind of use different tools to help it and save it, and many more. So keep an eye on our social media and also on our newsletter. We will be announcing it later on this week, and I think it's going to be a lots of fun. So this is now all out of the way, and before we start, let's quickly jump into the comments. Tony, good evening and greetings to you to Essex as well. Hello to Tom. Do you know if there are plans for a version for Android tablets? So officially, no. I've seen lots of comments from Skyland themselves saying that they can't really promise anything. I think mostly because they just released the application, so you don't really want to switch immediately to start to kind of advertise that you will do something in the future. But I guarantee they will work on making sure that they can offer it on this platform too. I don't really know the timeline for that, if it's going to be this year or if it's going to be earlier this year, but I would put my hand in a fire that that's what they're going to try to do, because simply because if you put that amount of effort into developing the application, when you will want to be able to offer it on more platforms than just the Apple or the iPad. So I was not surprised, but I was quite happy to see that the application is actually quite compatible with many different versions of iPad, even some of the little older versions or the iPad mini. So that's great, because some of the more developed photo editing applications have a restriction on maybe RAM or memory of the device or the version of the device. So the Luminar for iPad is quite compatible with wide array of the iPads, but I'm sure that in the plans there is goal to be able to also offer it on Android devices. I'm not sure if it's going to be a mobile phone, but probably on tablets and so on. So I really wouldn't be surprised to see it. Not sure when, but I'm sure it's going to come at some point. So this is all out of the way. We can now make sure that you can see my screen. So that's what we're going to do. And then we're going to turn our attention towards the pictures. Starting with the captures from Elizabeth and her landscape photos. So I have 4 images from Elizabeth. 2 of them are same. So we're going to look at the 3 of them. So let's start straight with the first one. So the first image is, let's look at the camera details, captured by Canon camera with the Tamron 28 to 300 millimeters. And looking at the camera settings, ISO 160 with 116 millimeters, f13, and 1/100th of a second. So for landscape capture, captured again during the day, the nice and low ISO is always the goal. 116 millimeters with a kind of quite longer punch in and zoom in there. F13, maybe a higher f-stop, but then you have a quite significant foreground element here. So just to make sure that everything is in focus, I understand to use of that. And then you have the 1/100th of a second shutter speed, just making sure that the The exposure is all good. Now, looking at the image itself, I have to say that it has a kind of different, not confusing, but like a strange elements. For example, I'm looking at the mountains with the snow, and above it is what I would believe is maybe like a clouds or fog, which can kind of start, and then it blends into blue sky. So I don't know if this was an attempt to the sky replacement, but it's just when you look at it, you know something isn't right with the picture because a blue cloud wouldn't be hovering over the rock or over the mountain like you can, for example, see here. If I zoom in, you can probably see it better. So I'm assuming that when you capture the picture, there was probably white sky, which was either created by clouds or the fog or the uh, yeah, the mist or whatever was over the mountains. And then you were able to apply sky replacement, and this was the result. And even though I understand the effort, it really looks very unnatural and it just doesn't really fit the scene. Clouds, yes, they could be hanging over the rocks and mountains, but blue isn't a cloud. Blue is something which is at the background at the back, and it should be definitely hidden behind the rocks. So that's probably the first big thing. Then when I look at the foreground, when I look at this part, um, it looks like almost you apply some not how you would call it. Uh, if you would apply some blur to the foreground of the image, let me again zoom in. And I don't know if you brushed it with a brush or if you use a gradient to add it, but you basically have a massive part of the image with the blur here. And then it goes to the sharp plants and then it goes to the background. So kind of mix of things which don't necessarily work together. So you when you we talked about your camera details, we talk about f13, so obviously higher f-stop to make sure that you have a details across the entire image. Yet then you kind of step in and try to soften the foreground, which I understand in a way of if you do that, you will add more focus to the middle of the image, so maybe like your main subject. But then the way it's done is really visible because there is a really clear line between I don't know how much you can see it on your screens, but you can see clearly that there is the sharp part and then there is a soft part. So if you adding this kind of blurry effect to the foreground to increase the depth and create that kind of depth of field look, you really have to do it very carefully. So when someone else look at it, it almost you can't even notice it. Definitely, there has to be big gradient between the sharp and unsharp areas. So again, it looks very realistic, and the amount of blur also has to be really small. So again, it just kind of fits the scene. So even though it's interesting picture, I like the mountain and the green foreground. It's just lots of things which really make it very unnatural. So Elizabeth, that's for this image here. Moving on to the second image, this is a little bit more drama here. So again, let's look at the camera details. Canon camera Tamron 28 to 300 millimeters, so same as the first image. Again, looking at the details, ISO 125, 62 millimeters, f13, and 100 of a second. So Elizabeth, on this one, again, nice and low ISO, so that's all good there. F13, similar to the first image, where looking at the image and looking at the sharpness of the foreground and the sharpness of the middle ground with the mountains, it all works there. I quite like that. And 100 of a second, yeah, you have a little darker foreground, but I think there is nothing overexposed. There's details all across, so that's all good there. Now looking at it, the sharpness is really decent, especially in the foreground. There's a touch of noise, but nothing crazy. So that's all good there as well. Now the overall look of the image. So the foreground, um, it's not necessarily distracting, but there is a lot of it, and it takes away from the attention of the middle ground, which are the mountains. But that's not necessarily the big part. I think for me, again, the sky seems to be a really unnatural here with this kind of heavy blue hanging over the mountains. So you have this really heavy, dark blue sky, which is hanging over mountains, which are clearly illuminated with the light somewhere from here. So it just doesn't look very natural, Elizabeth. The moment you look at it, you know something isn't right with it. It's not really balanced very well together. The sky is also very defined and it looks very kind of HDR like. So there's lots of details in it and clarity and contrast. And then, yeah, it's just, it doesn't really fit together. You have a really nice natural scene with a lovely light coming from this direction. And then there is the sky in it, which just doesn't really help. So even though it's a lovely view with the mountains and with the foreground, the sky really take a lots of attention away and it's very distracting on the image itself. So that's my view on that one. And finally, the third image right here, what we're looking at is, do we have any idea what we're looking at? Let's have a look. uh Not necessarily sure what we're looking at. Maybe it's like an old lighthouse or something like that. It's a lovely structure right here. Obviously, it's very much falling apart. But again, let's look at the camera details here. Tamron 28 to 300 millimeters, ISO 100, 28 millimeters, f13, and 1/160th of a second. So nice and low ISO, all good there. F13, again, we have a foreground element close to the camera, so F13 makes sense if you, again, want to make sure that you have a details all the way through. 100, 1 and 1/160th of a second. The exposure is good. It's a little bit on a darker side, but everything looks good. Details and texture in the sky. So all of that together works very well. So I quite like that. Now, one thing I'm noticing is a little bit of bright glow around the building itself. Now I'm going to zoom in so you guys can see it. That's the one thing which I would kind of keep an eye on. And this often happens when you have a darker background and brighter foreground, and it has this kind of straight lines on the edges. Or it also happens when you try to maybe make the foreground brighter to add more attention to it. It happens that then you get these kind of brighter glow on the edge. So something to look at later on. But otherwise, I quite like it. I think it's quite nice. When we talk about the artistic part of the image, it's an interesting composition. The building obviously being on this side, almost like in a lower third, working with the rule of thirds. I think that works nice. It works as a foreground element, opening the scene. The main subject is clearly visible and understandable, so that all works well too. In overall, as I say, I quite like the straight horizon with the texture in the sky. It creates a scene. So all in all, I quite like the image. I think it's quite nicely done. Um, the one thing I would just in post processing look at is the bright glow to try to remove that. It kind of goes around, but to adjust it, I would probably need a raw file to be able to work out what adjustment exactly did you make and what brought this glow out. Quite often, what you need to do is to bring some of the sliders down again a little bit when we do like lots of editing, like we take the highlights and make them really dark and open the shadows, and then we add the blacks and whites. When we push these sliders a lot, what happens? That's when we get the glow. So sometimes we need to go back, bring these sliders a little bit back to the center, and often that helps itself without the need of you to going in and try to brush it away. So that's about that for that. Obviously, you could edit it a little bit differently. You could make it more moody. You could, for example, make it more on a cool side. So we're looking at this kind of building which is falling apart and it's a dramatic day. So the warm look looks quite good, but you could also make it more, yeah, like I say, more on a cooler side. So something like this, maybe less saturation. So just maybe something like this, more contrast, definitely. And then let's have a look. If we would add a little bit of darkness into the sky, that would help as well. And finally, there is a tool called Dramatic Tool, which can be used on portrait captures, but it can also be used on landscape. I quite like that. And then you can end up with something like this. So something just a little bit different. You could also test one of the LUTs to see if one of them doesn't give you that kind of cinematic, dramatic look. Let's have a look. Maybe something like this, and you could end up with something a little bit more moodier, or even if you would add a little bit of fade to make it even more cinematic with a little bit of vignette, so you would end up with something like this. That would be also option. So let's have a look at the before, where obviously it's nicely done, it's natural edit, but there's a little bit of that warmthness which we don't necessarily connect with this type of dramatic capture. And then when you switch it around, you can also end up with something like this, with this dramatic scene, a little bit stronger clarity, a little bit more contrast, a little bit more on a cooler blue side of the white balance. All of this can really help to make the dramatic scene stand out. Okay, Elizabeth, thank you very much for sending your pictures over. It was a pleasure to look at them for you. And I hope that you can send more images for the next episode. Which brings us to Caroline. Caroline, what do we have? A dog running in the snow, which somehow I feel I already seen. Let's have a look if I can find the episode. Caroline. Yeah, I already saw the pictures earlier, but still, just very quickly about this dog before we move into the Tuscany capture. It's a lovely, lovely capture. I think it's really nicely done together. Lovely details on the dog itself. Lovely exposure with the sun coming from the side, creating a really nice scene. The snow around is actually added really nicely. I think it looks quite cool. And I mean, this is a great picture for a postcard or for a card to the family or for a post or as a memory for the dog. I think it's really, really nicely done. The movement of the dog works, the sharpness works. So I already talked about all of that in the past video, but still, I really enjoyed the picture. I think it's really nicely done and well done, well put together. Which brings us to the second image, the Tuscany drive-through, because I would call it Tuscany. I'm not 100% sure that it's there, but looking at it and looking at the overall feel, that's what it feels like. So let's start by looking at the camera details. Again, Canon 5D Mark IV with the lens 24 to 70 millimeters. And from the camera settings, ISO 100, 24 millimeters, f11 and 1/8 of a second. ISO 100, nice and low. It's always great to see. Obviously, with the landscape, and you want to really, the goal is to stay as low as possible so we don't add any additional digital noise. So if you need to go higher with the ISO, just put the camera on a tripod and really stick to 100 as much as possible. 24 millimeters on a lens this is probably as wide as I ever go in a landscape photography of this type. If I need to go wider, then I often go for panorama captures where I maybe capture multiple pictures and then stitch them together. Simply because once you go wider in this type of scenes, it really feels that the subjects which are a little bit further or far, they start to get really small and distorted and just kind of lose the proportion. So 24 millimeter is a good choice, and I use it often, but it's about as wide as I would go with the landscape captures. f11, great, especially for scene like this. You really want to make sure that you have sharpness from the front all the way to the back, which works really well here. And then we have the 1/8 of a second shutter speed, giving us interesting, sharp image. The light is a little bit flat, as you can see on the photo itself, but in overall, technically, I think it's well done. So, Caroline, all in all, looking at it, first, you can see a little edge right here, which I don't know if it's coming from a sky or other editing, but it's a little bit visible. Once you zoom in, you can really see the sharp edge there. And looking at the image itself, it seems like it's the sky itself. Why I'm mentioning the sky is also because of the direction of the light. On your image, it seems like the light source is somewhere around here or maybe on this side, where when you look at the image, you can see the shadows are actually falling into the road. So the light source would have to be more towards that side, and yeah, it would have to be adjusted. I have no problem with sky replacement as long as the sky really fits the scene. And this is where, I talked about it many times in this show. Really, the key element of sky replacement is, of course, technique, but Luminar you can do a great job at that. But what's even more important is to have access to a big library of skies and then really go through them and finding the one that will fit the scene. Another really important thing for sky replacement is I would never, for example, take an image which I take during gray, moody day and then try to turn it into golden hour captures. golden hour capture. That just doesn't work like that. When I use sky replacement, it's in a case. So let's say I go out, I have great sunset, but no details in the sky. So, for example, it's just a blue sky and the sun is setting on a side. So I have the right color from the sun, I have the right light, and everything works out. And then I just replace the sky to get the texture in the sky. So in that case, or for example, for the sunset, it happens that maybe I dialed wrong settings and the sun isn't really great or it's a little bit overexposed. In that case, you can use it too. But I wouldn't try to turn it into night shot, for example. And same, if I photograph a day which is on a moody gray day, what I would do, I would look for dramatic, moody gray sky to replace it with. So you're keeping the mood of the image. You're just trying to little bit enhance it. You don't want to turn it from moody to golden hour or from golden hour into the night. That is really difficult and it's really difficult to adjust. So that's for the sky replacement. That's probably one thing that is the most visible. Then once you start to look into it, you can see some of the elements on the side of the trees, which are also standing out. Something to keep an eye on too. So we talk about the sky replacement. We talk about the direction of the light. One more thing to keep an eye on is also the chromatic aberration. It's visible on some parts more than the other, but keep an eye on that. And finally, when it comes to editing, the white balance would need a little help. When you look at it, for a while, you start to see it has a quite strong green tint. Now, why does this happen? Quite often, when the camera captures scene where there is a dominant color, like the green or often a blue, what it does, it then takes the image and basically it pushes that tint into other areas of the photo. And that's exactly what's happening here. So to work it out, what we need to do, we need to just jump quickly into the develop tool. And there is a tint slider where on one side you're adding green and on the other side you can add magenta. And if you add enough magenta, what it's going to do, it's going to remove the green tint. Now, I don't want to overdo it, so let's go somewhere around 35. And it looks like it didn't really do anything until you look at the before and after. Let's have a look. Maybe it's more visible if I zoom in. Again, before, you can see how much of a green is there, and then after, how it kind of works out. How much you're going to adjust it is up to your eyes and what you prefer. You just want to be careful not to have pink, but also not to have the green tint in. Other than that, when it comes to composition, I really like it. I think it's very lovely. I like the leading line coming into the center of the image, the house at the end. The crop is quite nice. It's nicely done. So all of that works really, really well. It's just you need to work a little bit on. So we talked about the sky replacement, making sure that you choose the right sky. We talk about the tint and white balance. And those are things you maybe need to look at to make this image work. Now, finally, moving to Tony. Here we are. We are on some nature captures. Actually, 2 weeks ago, I was running a nature photography workshop here in Chichester, and we captured some great photos. Some of the flowers are out already blooming. So definitely, guys, if you have your camera and you haven't been out yet this year, or just very rarely, head out, have fun with it, because you can really capture some great shots and have a lots of fun. Let me I will show you later what we captured, but just because I saw the images, it reminded me that it's already great time to head out and try to photograph something like this. Okay, Tony, so 2 pictures. I mean, it's not a big surprise. I know that you're great at these captures. Like this one is really, really nice. I mentioned before, I think the square crops for these type of photos were great because they really bring the attention on the main subject and make it really work. So let's look at this one to start with. Captured with Canon 7D with the 18 to 135 millimeters. From the camera settings, ISO 200, 135 millimeters, f5.6, and 1/100 of a second. So nice and low ISO, 135 millimeters. Obviously, zoom in to get that lovely soft background there. f5.6, looking at the lens, is probably the limit as low as you can go. However, in a balance, it gives you quite nice sharpness from the front all the way to the back. The center or the middle of the plant isn't completely in focus, but I don't think necessarily that's the problem, because the main focus and subject is definitely the pink plant. So all in all, it looks quite good. There is a little bit of noise there. I wonder if you maybe didn't add a little bit like a film grain or something like that to make it more cinematic. Uh, Either way, I think it would be quite easy to remove the noise if necessary. So in overall, I think it's really nicely done. I quite enjoyed the stronger light coming from a side, giving us that kind of side uh, glow, which in this case helps us a little bit with the depth and the texture of the flower. What I like is that it's not necessarily like a super strong light which overwhelm the scene or creates really heavy highlights. It just really helps to for the flower to stand out. So that works really nicely. When it comes to the artistic part, I already mentioned I really enjoy the square crop for these type of captures because they really help to highlight the main subject, which is the flower. I in this case I do enjoy the soft background. I think it works really well. The contrast of the colors of the pink and gray at the back also works really well, making it again easy to recognize what to focus on. So all in all, Tony, great capture. Really enjoy that. And then moving on the second image for this week, again, Canon 18 to 135 millimeters, ISO 160, 118 millimeters, f8, and 125th of a second. So from the camera settings, again, all spot there. No problem with that. Looking at the flowers, it's quite nice to see that they all in focus. So with the little higher f-stop, I am sure that that helps. Yeah, again, kind of nice, soft background. It's almost on the edge of being a little bit uninteresting because it's just lots of blue. So because of there is no texture, there's nothing. It almost looks like it's on a paper, but that's not really a big issue. The light is nice and diffuse, starting from a center. Nice details, touch of noise, but nothing crazy. So all in all, technically, I think it's very well done. Artistically, when you kind of put these things together, I would probably try to avoid this stop. I think it's just a little bit distracting. So I don't know if you could just somebody could hold it in the meantime when you take the picture or how to avoid it. But I think just kind of take away attention from the rest of the image. And even though the main subject is brighter and saturated, because the main subject is brighter and saturated, the contrast to it is the dark green. So it still attract attention of the eye, and I think it's unnecessary. I would just try to avoid it in the future. It's quite nice to see that you try to capture multiple subjects at the same time as well. So because sometimes we get comfortable by capturing just one, it's not necessarily easy, but it's easier than trying to implement multiple subjects and making sure that they all have a good light and they are sharp and so on. So it's nicely put together, Tony. I really enjoy the image. If I have to choose out of the two, I probably enjoy this one a little bit more, maybe because of the more interesting background and the light from the side, but both of them are really nicely put together. So nothing really to add to this, Tony. Well done. Great, great captures. I almost wonder if maybe it's time for you to try to challenge yourself when you're capturing these kind of nature photos. Maybe keep an eye on, some other things. I was thinking because of the workshop, I was thinking about like bugs or bees or the animals as they wake up now. Maybe to try to capture them, to just maybe incorporate a different shutter speed into these captures, and maybe just try to challenge yourself more on that note. And if you enjoy taking pictures of the nature photos, try to maybe play around with things like leaves or branches, branches with drops of water. Just add another level and another step to just keep improving and maybe step out of the comfortable zone. So that would be what I would try, as I think you're really good at this. So now the next step would be maybe find a flower where there are some drops of water or morning dew and try to incorporate that, or a spider web or stuff like that. So that would be a next step for me. So anyway, this is it for this week. Folks, thank you very much for joining me this week. It was a pleasure to have you over. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I'm away to Birmingham this weekend, and it's a 4-day show. So I will be there until Tuesday. So the next photography show will be in 2 weeks' time, still in March. So if you have your images, make sure that you upload them to the Dropbox using the link in the photography group or in the membership page. And otherwise, head out with your camera. The spring is coming. If you from this part of the world, it's definitely worth it. You can capture some great pictures. Even when it's overcast, that's actually even better case for these kind of photos because you have a nice and balanced light. Now, looking into the comments, glad to see I'm still with Clever Photographer. Will you be releasing any new software this year? Well, we don't really release software. We release tools and supportive materials and courses. And yes, definitely we have a lineup of products coming over the next several months. So first thing coming will be end of this week, where we're gonna be releasing uh, tickets for the landscape photography conference, which will be happening at the end of the May. Then I think that we have another product lineup at the end of March, and then also at the end of April. So lots to come, as well as from the world of Luminar. Working closely with the team. I think there is lots to be excited for and look forward to. One more time, if you haven't had a chance to look at the Luminar for iPad application, do that. It has a 7-day trial for free, so you can't really lose anything other than checking it out and see what you think. If you get stuck with anything, you know where to find me, info@Clever Photographer, or you can contact me directly on my Facebook page or Instagram page at Boris Photography. Folks, have a lovely evening. Take care, stay safe. And if you are in Birmingham this weekend, come and see me at the Skylum stand. I would love to meet you all in person.